Does the state of education, and particularly the teaching of history in the West in general, but in your country in particular, have something powerful to say about the way in which we now seem to be ignorant of the lessons of history?
Well, I don't think that I could assert generally that those who teach history in our institutions of higher learning are apt to address those questions. There's been a generational change. And I think politics and maybe culture as well are generational. And there's been a move away from thinking seriously as historians about military affairs. That died out quite some time ago. Almost nowhere in the United States is military history taught. Diplomatic history's disappeared too. Many institutions during Vietnam had diplomatic historians rather than military historians. Now they have neither. Economic historians. There's next to no one teaching economic history in the United States. And the last thing that's dying out is political history. Now, one consequence of this is history majors have declined radically. Because if you do not talk about things that people care about, no one's going to come. And so just as literature departments are losing their way in the United States and losing their clientele, so history departments have begun to lose their clientele. Now, I don't encounter this directly because I teach at an oasis. I teach at Hillsdale College, and sometimes people ask me, what's it like? And I say, Williams College, 1955 with girls. And I can add, and with African Americans, because this was an abolitionist college, and it has always been open to African Americans. But we have a curriculum that's very similar to what the curriculum would have been like in 1955. And the consequence is I only encounter this when I go to conferences or when I meet with students from other universities. Now, I've been here for 15 years, and in those 15 years, there's been a transformation, and the transformation is largely generational. And what I would say about what's happened in the academy, starting in literature, moving into history, and who knows where else it will go, is the driving force is nihilism. There is a kind of hatred of the inherited order without any notion of something to put in its place. For all that was wrong with communism, they had an idea of what they wanted to put in its place. Now, what they did put in its place was a monstrosity, and it involved the deaths of hundreds of millions of people. Now what we have is simply hatred of the inherited order. And the problem with that is, though the inherited order is anything but perfect, it's by historical standards awfully good. I mean, if you take the situation in the United States, this is a country where ordinary people live very well. And they live very well because of natural resources, of course, but also of good public policy with regarding economic matters, good public policy with regard to political matters. And the key thing with regard to political matters is that not be too difficult for there to be a redress of grievances, if I may use the old English phrase, which is to say, from time to time, ordinary people have an opportunity to judge those who rule them, and it's a real opportunity. And what you, prior to the current period, what you saw in American history is a moving back and forth between two separate political elites, two major political parties, in which throwing the rascals out, as we Americans sometimes say, was very commonplace. And the consequence is you had a public policy that was extremely responsive to felt public needs.
Yep.
Now, I won't argue that this was always perfectly rational. In fact, surely it was not always perfectly rational. But it was more rational than you would get if you would get a political party that is firmly ensconced in power and can't be moved out of power. So the inherited system articulated under the Constitution that was framed in the late 18th century, adjusted in modest ways subsequent to that time, has served us very well. And what we're looking at is an attempt to overthrow that system by breaking all of the rules that are not written into law, all the unwritten rules, the mores and manners that govern the way the majority party and the minority party operate towards one another in the House of Representatives and in the United States Senate, the unwritten rules about how you conduct yourself in elections, the written rules about how you conduct those elections. All this is being overturned in the interests of getting a kind of monopoly of power. And those who are desperately seeking this monopoly of power know what they want to get rid of, but they have no idea what they want to put in its place. There really isn't a kind of positive program. And so there's going to be tremendous conflict